Hello, this is an assessment and a comparison between two Model 10 Bechstein upright pianos, one on the left 1905, on the right 1906. They're very similar pianos, but as we can see, cosmetically are quite different. The way they've both been repolished, but been repolished very differently. We believe they're both rosewood pianos. I'm going to concentrate mainly on the mechanics, though, to see what the differences are. Both of them have got very good ivory keys, not damaged at all, really. This is the 1906 one, and the other one, again, no chips, no keys have come off and been stuck back on, so that's extremely encouraging. I'm so sorry I got them the wrong way around. This is the 1906 one, sorry, 5 one. This is actually a client's piano that we're renting out for them. They don't have to pay storage then, and they want the piano back, I think, so this one won't be available for purchase, but we do a cheaper rental with that sort of arrangement, and they don't have to pay storage. The piano itself then, this has just been reconditioned, so it's not fully restored. As we'll see, the next one is fully restored. So this one, which is for sale, is fully restored in a lot of detail, really, by experienced Bechstein restorers who actually focus mostly on Bechstein. So expect the work to be done very well, and indeed it has been done very well. There are some things I want to point out, though, which we feel we'd like to do. So the damping regulation is good. The new dampers, recovered hammers here, not new hammers, not brand new hammers, but just the felts. And I think since then, not sure if it's been refaced since then as well, but sometimes hard to tell. But they're very good hammers, as we'll see in a minute. And let's listen to the tone of both pianos. That's the key thing that we want to focus on, and also the touch. So the 1905 one, reconditioned. 1906. And fully restoring it, we've got new strings here. By the way, the tuning pins are obviously new here, but not the rest plank, but they're extremely tight. Going back to the reconditioned one, the tuning pins are original. They are very small, as we've shown in other videos. That's one way of telling, but they're also a key factors to whether we fully restore or not, is to whether these are tight or not. And these are tight, though they're not quite as tight as the fully restored one. These are much bigger tuning pins. They have to be bigger if you restring the piano, 2 sizes up probably, and very tight. So that obviously is a factor that sways towards this piano. Tight tuning pins is important. Having said that, this will be fine as long as it's not baked, and it'll carry on staying tuning. And they are very tight, so that doesn't cry out to be fully restored. Now the tone is different on the two pianos, and there's other aspects we must want to focus on. Not to go too long, make the video too long. So this is the reconditioned one. And the fully restored one, the sound has a bit more bite and a bit more clarity. See how that compares with the Yamaha U1. And the restored Bechstein has a very lush, warm sound. And by the way, the bottom bass here, you can hear straight strung. Now, interestingly enough, Bechstein do an overstrung, which is a model. This is a Model 10, so the Model 9 overstrung doesn't have such long strings here. We've made a video on that. These are longer strings. And also you've got better damping because there's no crossover point where the dampers have to be shorter. On this Yamaha, for instance, you have shorter dampers here. It ends up being not quite so good damping, but it's obviously Yamaha, so it's well made. But interesting enough, the tone there is obviously more varied than it would be on a straight strum because it's going to different parts of the soundboard. Here's the reconditioned Bechstein. And the fully restored one, very good damping, but something I want to point out about the dampers which is important, and that is, although the dampers are working extremely well, the damper springs on this new one are very are very strong. I've weakened one here, the end ones here have been weakened a bit, and the touch is much better as a result. If I play these two notes, which we haven't weakened the springs are too tight, and as a result, it's a very different feel when you play without the damping off, sorry, with the damping on. So here's damping off, and it feels very different. Interesting enough, some new pianos, we've had to weaken the dampers on. Top quality makers as well, one of the top 4 makes, we found that the springs were too tight, and we had to weaken them because there was just too much contrast. So this is 63 grams weight here, going down on that note. And if I lift the damper off, the damper is pulling it up. So that's 63 grams it's pulling up. In fact, we found it was 70 grams roughly. It's pulling it up. If we look at one that we've weakened, which is this one, it stays down. And so it should, because it's really far too heavy. And on the reconditioned one with 55 grams, I lift my foot off the pedal and you can just see a slight movement, but it's not really coming up very far. In fact, the reconditioned one does need some work because the dampers are lifting off too early, so we need to get those lifting off later, otherwise that also makes it feel heavy and doesn't dampen so well. So on the fully restored one, now we've adjusted those to weaken the springs basically, are feeling much nicer without the pedal than these two, where you can feel the dampers coming in, and actually they're a bit early as well. So there's regulation work to do there, and certainly, as I mentioned before, we find some new manufacturers, the springs are too tight on the piano. This is a 1983 Foric, superbly engineered piano, and it just feels, you can hardly tell when the damper's coming off. So the 52 gram weight, the damper doesn't lift that off, and the note next to it, so just very, very slight, so about 52 grams. So that's a comparison between 2 Model 10 Bechsteins just in stock. This is the 1905 one that's been reconditioned rather than fully restored. And really both of them sound so special, really. We're very fond of the Bechstein Model 10. By the way, Model 10 starts from about 1902. The previous one's a Model 5, and so that could do with full restoration normally, because the rest plank tends to be weaker than and tends to suffer with central heating. And even when you fully restore it, if you don't change the rest plank, then that can give problems. But no such problem with the Model 10 normally. So it just has a very special tone right throughout, and very, very good tenor area. As we were saying, the strings are longer than overstrungs, but in the bottom bass it's not so strong, but then you play the bottom bass in the octave. Let's have a look at the fully restored one and compare it with. So this is the fully restored Model 10, restored apart from the rest plank, but it doesn't need it really, and it's been restored in great detail. But the one thing I noticed particularly about this is the touch. I actually prefer the touch on the other one because of the springs being too strong, so that's something we're going to work on, obviously. But the tone throughout is excellent. I think the bass has improved with restringing as well. It just has a very delicate tone in this area, which those who have Model 10 Bechsteins will understand, and tuners I'm sure will agree. It's very special. And they do restore beautifully. Very adequate for study, by the way. If you're a musician and want to practice, then there's no reason why you shouldn't have an older piano. It's got up to 85 rather than 88 notes, but apart from that, it's You can play everything that in fact, you can play every exam piece you need because they don't go beyond that anyway. Thank you very much for listening. Sorry, I think I should have mentioned something about weakening the springs. I mentioned about weakening these two, just to show you what they did there. So pulling the action forward, we can see the dampers, we can see the springs on the side in here. So there's the spring, and I chose these two because they're easier to access. But if we push the damper, then that's a weaker spring than this one, much weaker. Of course, you don't want it to be too weak because it won't dampen properly, but the idea is not to make them as strong as possible or come off too early because it will just affect the touch too much. So that's the other one weakened, and this is much stronger. Again, we don't want it too weak because it needs to dampen, so it's a bit of a trade-off between it dampening properly and not being too strong as well. So let's have a listen to them. So if we listen to one that's been weakened and one that hasn't, so this was the weakened one, next to it, and these two, weakened, not weakened. Now it's a trade-off because you can just about hear that this takes slightly longer to dampen. Let's listen to the ones on the reconditioned piano. So those are weaker springs, and that's dampening very well. So you obviously want as good damping as possible, but not at the expense of the touch, so not too strong a spring.